I'm not sure how your weeks were, but it was a really long week around here. So just to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on here, on Monday, Father Jack went in for an operation, and the operation went well and everything like that. He's recovering well, but he wants to give you a little bit more information later this week. But he wants to tell you that himself, but just know for now that he is recovering from his operation, and he's steadily recovering. On the other hand, though, on Wednesday, Father Greg was celebrating the 6:45 Mass, and he started to sweat. His hands were starting to swell, and he got so weak that he couldn't finish Mass standing up. So we had a parishioner actually call an ambulance, and it was waiting for him as soon as he finished Mass, and he got wheeled out, and he spent all of Wednesday in the hospital and then most of Thursday. And then they sent him back home, and the good news is that they couldn't find, it wasn't something, I guess, major like we were expecting, maybe a heart issue. But the bad news is they didn't tell us anything. They had no idea what actually was going on, which meant that we didn't know how to make him better. So anyway, Father Jack and I on Thursday evening had to tag team Father Greg and tell him that he's not allowed to say the 6:45 Mass as he was scheduled for Friday because he needed some time to recover. So anyway, I said the 6:45 Mass, I said the 8:15 Mass because Father Jack is still recovering, so I've been kind of a one-man pony show here. But then what ended up happening was at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, our cleaning lady who comes in only on Fridays found Father Greg, and he had had a fall. And, based on, we share a wall with one another, so if he shared a wall while I was in the room, I would have heard it. And so based on not hearing the fall, I can tell you that he was either there on the floor for 3 hours or 6 hours, which was, but anyway, so what ended up happening after that was that I spent the next however much time, I lost track of time by that point, trying to get him picked up, trying to get him dressed, get him cleaned up, all those other different things. And just as, I'm not going to describe too much in detail, but I'm going to say that I found newfound respect for all of you who take care of an aging parent or loved one, because I'm going to remember that for quite a while. But when I finally got Father Greg picked up and he was looking out at the room, I realized he didn't realize where he was. He thought he was at a meeting, and his mind was telling him that for the whole time. And when he saw that he was in his room, he got very, very confused. And when the paramedics later came and picked him up, he didn't even realize that he had had a fall. So, I mean, there's been this rapid decline that we have seen in his health, and we don't really know what's going on from there. We are right now struggling as a parish because we don't have access because of HIPAA laws. We're not able to be told how his health is. We're trying to work on that right now. But anyway, so it's a very precarious situation with Father Greg. So anyway, this week, for me in particular, but I guess now that I'm telling all of you, I have had an experience of an aging priesthood this past week. One who is 75 years old and his body is starting to show signs of wear and tear, and the other one who's 85 years old, who is really starting to have a serious rapid decline. And I just wanted to spend this homily talking to you about the priesthood. Because I think with the priesthood, we sometimes have this idea that there is a priest shortage. And I just want to give you some context for that, is that when the United States had signed the Constitution, there were 30 priests to cover all 13 colonies in Canada. That, my friends, is a priest shortage. No cars, no airplanes, they're going by horse, they're going by foot. That is a priest shortage. What we ended up seeing in the 1950s is we had this spike of invocations that we had never seen before and we hadn't seen since. And what we're seeing now is that age range that had spiked, we're now seeing them falling to their age. And we're actually right now, rather than having a shortage, we're returning to more of the normal situation in a very, very land spacious country. That's what we're seeing. So when we're talking about a priest shortage, be sure to keep things in its proper perspective. And yet, at the same time, what happens with the priesthood is I just want to talk to you about how much I love my priesthood and what the priesthood is. Because I would love it if any of you young men in here can be considering a call to be able to do what I do. Because one of my greatest experiences is that this right here it's called the patent. And the paten is the little dish that we put the bread on that when we're turning it into the body of Christ. What ends up happening is basically a gold dish, and it's reflective. And so when I'm leaning over to consecrate the bread, turning it into the body of Christ, what will sometimes end up happening is that I will catch my own eye. And I don't know if you've ever had that experience before of looking in a mirror and you catch your eye, and you're not just looking at your physical appearance, but you're like gazing into your own soul. Maybe you're getting ready for something really important, like a meeting or something, and you're getting yourself pepped up for what's going on. So you're like, all right, here goes. Or maybe you're having this experience of like real joy, and you're looking inside your soul and seeing your own joy. Or maybe you are looking inside and you're feeling guilt and shame, and you're looking in your eye and you're seeing all of that. I then want you to imagine having that experience, but not having it in front of a mirror in your bathroom, but having it as you are consecrating the body and blood of Christ. Because my experience at that point is I'm taking everything that is going on in my life and I'm looking at it, and sometimes I say to myself, oh boy, Paul, you really stepped in it. Or sometimes I'm looking at myself and I'm seeing something great that's happening in my life, and I'm just seeing that joy reflected back to myself. But then what ends up happening is that you got to think about the words that the priest is saying at that point. When he says, this is my body, this is my blood. And the reason we say it that way as priests, rather than saying this is Christ's body and this is Christ's blood, is because of what we believe the priesthood is. The priesthood, when I was ordained, I was in some way called conformed to Christ, which means that not that I've become sinless, not that I've become perfected of any human faults that existed beforehand, but when I am saying the words, this is my body, this is my blood, or I'm in the confessional and I say, I absolve you from your sins, it is not me, Father Paul, that is saying those things at that moment. It is Christ that is using my voice to speak on his behalf. And so it's actually Christ speaking to you at that moment. That's why, as priests, we don't say this is Christ's body. We say this is my body. But think about saying those words as you are staring into the paten, into your own eyes. Who is speaking to who? Because at one and the same time, Christ is speaking to all of you, and he's saying, this is my body given up for you. But then at the same time, I'm looking into my own eyes and I'm hearing those words as I'm staring into my eyes, and whatever sin I've committed that day, however good I'm feeling that day, and Christ is speaking directly to me. This is my body given up for you. But then I want you to think it's not just Christ's words. I am the one speaking these words. And I'm looking at that host in my hands, and I am speaking then, using my words to Christ himself, saying, this is my body given up for you. And I'm saying that to all of you. This is my body given up for you. And every single one of those statements is true, no matter how you look at it, and no matter how many times I think over that fact, I can't get used to it. The mystery never goes away. And I can't explain to you the joys that I have in the priesthood of hearing people's confessions, because many of you might think that there's all sorts of salacious details about people's lives and everything, and I'll tell you what, hearing people's sins is so boring. It's like taking out the trash. They're not fun, they're not memorable, they're ugly. But what is beautiful in that situation is seeing somebody come into the confessional because they haven't been able to talk about something for 30 years and being the very first person that they share that with. Not because of who I am, they don't know me from Adam. In fact, they probably came to me because they didn't know me from Adam. If they're going to confess something they haven't talked to somebody about in 30 years, they're coming because they want to talk to God. And I get to be a privileged part of that conversation. And I watch the grace of God as they walk out of the confessional with that shame that has haunted them for so long. And sometimes I see them completely healed. And you see them walk into that confessional, and you see them walk out, and you just see the same person. But what happened on the inside is something that is indescribable. And I get to be a privileged witness to that. That is my priesthood. That is my joy. But then what ends up happening, I think so often, is that people hear about all that, and then they think about there's this one thing that people just don't understand, and that is priestly celibacy. They just don't get it. And I'll tell you, this is just a critique from a priest to all of you. I don't like to be mean to people or anything, but I want to be honest with you. I have no idea why nobody asks me about my celibacy. I'm talking about not just on normal occasions. I'm talking about you get somebody who's slightly tipsy, like at a fundraiser or something like that, and they're just curious, so they ask the priest about like what would drive you to take on a vow of celibacy. I don't even get that. But I'm telling you, my celibacy, it's not just a gift that I have given to the church, a sacrifice that I have made, because I think that's how people so often see it, is that it was a sacrifice that was made, and therefore it's something really hard, it's something that I don't want to talk about, it's something that will bring me to tears because I don't get marriage. And the fact of the matter is, celibacy is not just my gift to you, it is God's gift to me. And I don't know how I can explain that to any of you unless you ask me about it, because I can't tell you that in a 15-minute homily. I have received so many blessings, I have received so many graces through my celibacy that I cannot begin to list them all for you. So please, ask me about my celibacy. Because when I first started off, I mean, like, celibacy was for me a means to an end. I loved the priesthood. I felt a call from the priesthood from when I was very young. And when I finally entered seminary, it was like, you know what? Celibacy is kind of like a means to an end. It's like that thing that you have to promise, that thing that's the bad part of the job that just goes along with the part of the job that you really like. And that's how I experienced it at first. And then I came to grow for a deep love for marriage, which everybody in the seminary has to do. They don't have people running away from marriage in seminary. Nobody's allowed to do that. Everybody must have the experience of seeing marriage for what it is, a wonderful, great human good, so that they actually are able to make a proper discernment, a proper decision, and to make sure that celibacy actually is what God is calling them to. And that's a part of every seminarian's discernment. But what ended up happening was, and especially early on into my priesthood, that was kind of the way I took it. And then somewhere along the line, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, after I had actually experience of celibacy from the other side, realizing what a gift it had been in my life, that I couldn't even begin to describe it. I just want to tell you what else happened on Friday as I'm picking up Father Greg and everything like that, is I was about 30 to 40 minutes late for a funeral meeting. The couple was waiting for me, and they were, to bury their father and father-in-law. And so of course, I'm 30, 40 minutes late. These people are probably pretty angry at that point. So I walk in and I just tell them I have a really good excuse. I was picking up Father Greg, he was tired, he had fallen and everything. And what ended up happening, because this was a funeral meeting, is then this became the source of a very deep conversation very quickly. Because, of course, what do you think that they were dealing with, taking care of an aging parent themselves? They were dealing with the same things that I was. And so while all of you might have the experience that you have your close friends, you have your spouse, you have your family, that you can have those deep conversations with, but for the most people in the world, you have to get through all of those other things. Hey, what's your name? How many kids do you have? What do you do? And before you get through a year, 2 years before you can get to the deep conversations, I got to the deep conversation in 5 minutes. And I'll tell you, I walked out of there and I'm really close friends. I'm going to continue this relationship probably for the rest of my life because we touched each other so deeply in that moment. And so then I walk back into the rectory, and the rectory is chaos, and the fact that's going through my mind is as bad as what has happened today with Father Greg. Am I allowed to be this happy? Because that has been my experience of my own celibacy, and is that it has been forming deep and meaningful relationships with more people than I can possibly imagine. And what ends up happening in most people's experience is that in our culture today is that we think that sex and intimacy are somehow the same thing. And that's actually kind of a lie, because even though marriage is the place where most people experience a deep intimacy with their spouse through the marital act, the fact of the matter is that human beings do not need sex. We do need human relationships. And while 99.9% of you are going to experience that in the call to marriage, there is a group of us who Christ himself, by the way, says is able to receive as a gift something different. And that something different is to be able to experience that intimacy with a large group of people, to be able to meet them in a way heart to heart, in a way that is utterly and absolutely satisfying. And with marriage, you all see the benefits out front. And then you learn about the sacrifices that come later on. For me, my experience of celibacy is the exact opposite. I saw all the sacrifices out front, and it took me actually making the commitment and making the leap and trusting in God before I was able to see finally all of the blessings that came with it. Because here is the interesting truth. Christ himself tells us when he is talking about marriage and the nature of marriage, he's talking to a bunch of Sadducees, and they're trying to trip him up about the nature of marriage, about this one woman who married 7 different men, and each of them died along the way, and then she died, and who she married to in heaven. And Jesus gives us basically answers saying there is no marriage in heaven because there's no need of having children. And what ends up happening in that thing is that Jesus gives us what might be a sad truth for many of you, is that there's going to be no sexual relations in heaven. You're no longer going to be married to your spouse in heaven, and that is something that Christ himself tells us. But if that makes you sad, what will remain with your spouse is the deep friendship, the deep intimacy that you shared with them in this life. And I just want to tell you, if you look at it that way, and then you see what my celibacy is, you will realize that in some sense, I have begun living my heaven here on earth. That's how I see my celibacy. Because while I might not have the experience of relations with a woman, the fact of the matter is that the deep intimacy that you share with your spouse, I share with in many different ways with a vast number of people. And I want to tell you how full I feel on a regular basis. And which is amazing for me because when I was younger, my baseline was moderate depression. That's where I was. So I would have my good days, I would have my bad days, but on the average day, I had moderate depression. Since becoming a priest, I have my good days, I have my bad days. I have people who drive me nuts that I have to deal with regularly. I have parts of the job that I don't enjoy doing. But my baseline is now moderate joy. That's my average. And I owe that not only to my priesthood, but to the gift of celibacy that God gave me. I don't know if you've ever heard a priest talk this way before. I would love to tell you more, but I need you to ask me about it. But more importantly, the reason why I need you to ask about this is because the sad, scary fact is that when Catholics are surveyed, 70% of them say that they would discourage their son or loved one from becoming a priest. And there's many different reasons for that, but I think most people, when they think about the priesthood and they think about not getting married, they think, well, you must be committing yourself to a life of sadness. You must be committing yourself to a life of sacrifice where you're giving of yourself, but you're never receiving anything in return. How can you possibly be happy that way? I think that's the reality. I haven't been able to survey that 70%, but that's the reality. And so if we want to talk about a priest shortage, we need to kind of start there, of being able to have a conversation as a parish of how do you review what the priest does on a daily basis? Not only coming to a greater knowledge of what's happening here on the altar, because even if celibacy were simply a sacrifice, what is happening on that altar is worth it. What is happening in that confessional is worth it. But the thing is that celibacy is not simply a sacrifice. For those who can receive it, it is a gift. And the more we come to understand that, the more if we start having that 70% start being willing to talk to their sons about the joys of the priesthood, maybe that will automatically take care of any priest, quote-unquote, shortage that we have. So, brothers and sisters, that's the message I want to proclaim to you today. We need the next Father Jack to come along. We need the next Father Greg to come along. They're not going to come by simply reflecting on priesthoods which are, getting close to their end and where they're getting to their heavenly reward. We need them to come from the next generation to speak to the next generation. And those people are going to come from families like yours that are raised to know their faith, to love their faith, and yes, to even love the priesthood. And so I just want to present to you today the fact that in any vocation that God gives you, it's not just simply a sacrifice, although there is sacrifice in any vocation. Ultimately, what God is trying to give us when he gives us our calling is our own happiness. Let us stand and profess our faith. I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty,